Okay, so to continue what we're doing today, so today, yesterday we did y equals sine of x. Today we're going to do y equals cosine of x. Okay, the graphs look a little bit different. But a lot of the points are going to be a lot of the same. But your graph will look a little bit different. So yeah, so all right. So y equals cosine of x, okay? Or you could write it as y equals a cosine of bx, right? So a and b are still the same, just like in sine of x. And a and b are still the same as far as like a is for amplitude, and then b is used to determine period. Okay, now, like I said in my explanation, cosine looks a little different, right? So y equals cosine of x. So your amplitude for this, y equals cosine of x, your amplitude is 1, right? Because there's no number in front of cosine, so it's 1. And your period length, there's no number in front of x, it's the understood one, so it's 2 pi divided by 1, so it's 2 pi, right? And now, like in my last video, towards the end, if you take 2 pi and divide it by 4, right, for those 4 points along the x-axis, I get pi over 2. So each mark will be a pi over 2. Okay, so just like sine, cosine starts at along the y-axis. Okay, so my first mark will be pi over 2. Right, because this right here tells me that it's going to go, each time goes up by pi over 2. So my next mark will be 2 pi over 2, or just pi. And then the next mark will be 3 pi over 2, so 3 halves. So 3 pi over 2. And then my fourth mark will be 4 pi over 2, or 2 pi. Okay, now, well, I didn't give myself enough room, so hold on. Let me just rewrite that a little down here. Oops. All right, so I have pi, 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, now, unlike sine, that starts at the origin, cosine starts at a different place. Cosine actually starts at your amplitude, right? So because your amplitude is 1, cosine is going to start at y equals 1. It starts along the y-axis wherever your amplitude's at. Okay, now your pi over 2, at pi over 2, cosine comes down and it crosses the x-axis. All right, and then at pi, okay, cosine comes down to the negative 1, your negative amplitude. Okay, and then at 3 pi over 2, cosine comes back up and goes to the x-axis, and then at 2 pi, it comes back at your amplitude, which is y equals 1. Okay, so if you connect your thing, it does this. Now, if you continued, it would continue the wave, right? It just looks a little different. Instead of going up above the x-axis and below like sine does, cosine just does this little part. Okay, so it's kind of like just one section of the sine wave. Okay, so your notes. So let me open it up. Here. Okay, so these are your notes that I sent you. Okay, so the graph of y equals cosine of x. So I've already kind of did this just to kind of fill them out, right? So remember, your A is 1, your period length is 2 pi divided by the number in front of the x, which in this case is 1, so it's 2 pi. So I'm going to take 2 pi and divide it by 4, so I can get my 4 points along the x-axis, and I get pi over 2. So that's how I get pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, right? Your amplitude is 1, so I'm going to go up 1 on the y-axis and down 1. And so, like I said, cosine starts at your amplitude. So it starts at 1, comes down at pi over 2 to the x-axis. At pi, it goes to the negative y-axis. 3 pi over 2 comes back. And then at 2 pi, it comes back to your original a where you started, and it would continue on down the x-axis if you continue to graph. So if you connect, it would look like that, right? And you just keep going. Okay. Now, your homework problems are going to kind of be a variation of y equals cosine of x. They're just going to start adding numbers in the a and the b position, and so then that changes how tall and how long your graph becomes. Okay, so y equals 2 cosine of x, right? So your amplitude is 2, right, because it's in front of the trig function, and your period length, p, is 2 pi, and there's no number in front of x, so it's 1. So that would be 2 pi. I take that divided by 4, and I get pi over 2. So each mark is going to be pi over 2. So this is 2 pi, not to get confused. So I take 2 pi divided by 4, and I get pi over 2. So if I graph, right, based on this, each mark is going to be pi over 2. So it looks like that, right? Cosine starts high. So what I mean by that, it starts at your amplitude. So it's 2, right? So I'm going to start way up here, okay? And then it falls to, pi over 2 falls to 0 on the x-axis. It falls to the x-axis 0, being like a 0, like in your graph. And then it falls at pi to your negative amplitude. And then at 3 pi over 2 is back to the x-axis. And then at 2 pi, it's up here. So if you connect, right? And they'll look distorted. If you actually graph this out and made it really big, you would see that these numbers start changing the graph, and it starts making it taller, or it shrinks it and makes it smaller, or scrunches it down, you know, whatever. All right, so the next one, y equals negative 2 cosine of x. So your amplitude is negative 2. Your period length, there's still no number with x, so your period length is 2 pi divided by 1, because it's the understood 1. So your period length is 2 pi. So then to get each mark, just like before, you take 2 pi and divide it by 4, and you get pi over 2. Okay, so each mark's going to be pi over 2. So I do that, so pi over 2, pi, that looks like negative pi, sorry. So that's, this is pi, this is 3 pi over 2, and this is 2 pi. Okay, so because your amplitude's negative, just like sine where you go down, cosine does the same thing. So instead of starting up here, I'm going to start down here at the negative, along the negative y-axis. So I'm going to start down here. Okay, at pi over 2, it comes to 0. At pi, I'm at the maximum, so it's at y equals 2. Okay, 3 pi over 2, I'm at 0. And then at 2 pi, I'm back at negative, y equals negative 2. So my graph looks something like that. Okay, so basically the graph just flips, just like y equals sine of x. Okay, now, what happens when they start messing with your b value? So when they start putting in numbers with the x value. So in this one, y equals negative 4 cosine of 1/2 x. So your amplitude, your amplitude is negative 4, and your period length, p, is 2 pi divided by 1/2. Okay, so if you take 2 divided by 1/2, you get 4 pi, right? So your amplitude, or your period length is now, your graph, the length of your graph is now 4 pi. So instead of 2 pi, it's 4 pi, so it's twice as long. Okay, so to get each mark, I'm going to take 4 pi. So I take 4 pi and divide it by 4, and I get each mark being pi. Okay, so I come over here, and I put each mark, instead of pi over 2, I figured it to be pi. So this is pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, and 4 pi. Okay, now my amplitude's -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So because it's negative, I start down here at the bottom, and then at pi, I go to 0, and then at 2 pi, I come all the way up here to +4. 3 pi, I come back down to the x-axis, and then 4 pi, I come to the y equals -4. So my graph is really tall. Now I can't connect dots, so it looks kind of funny, but that's what it looks like. Hopefully this helps. If this doesn't, please just let me know, and I can try to re-explain it or help find you some other help from someone that maybe can explain a little bit better. All right.